on the LAC side.
Okay.
Because my email just crapped out.
Okay.
Okay. My job is a system librarian, which means that my job is to help the staff get the most out of the systems that we use to manage the published collection.
Okay.
And to help make sure and to help adjust what we can adjust for our automated system to help serve clients better.
Okay. Okay.
So that includes conversations about technical settings as well as conversations about workflows, because the different areas all overlap, especially in terms of client service. What else? And it can include other things like doing reports or statistics, and helping to troubleshoot, that type of thing.
Okay. All right. So LAC now uses, if I'm correct with my research, the World Share Management Services, the cloud-based LSP. Is that right? Use that WMS?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. You use that for your circulation.
Yeah. Yeah, we call it.
Oh, I've lost you. I heard you call it, and then.
Oh, no, I can still hear you.
You can hear me. Good. Okay. I can't hear you.
No. Yeah, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So you said you call it?
Okay, sorry. I jumped in and then stopped myself.
Oh, go ahead.
You're right. We're on World Share Management Services.
Okay.
Internally, we call the staff modules World Share.
Okay.
For short.
Okay.
Because that works in both English and French.
Okay.
And the OPAC, the Public Access Catalog module, has a branded name of Aurora.
Okay.
So it's an OCLC product, but the name for it is Aurora.
Okay. Okay. Now, my question was, compared to other automated circulation systems that you've used in the past, how would you compare WMS to them? Do you find that are there areas that it's lacking? Are there areas that there's strengths? What do you find in your experience?
My experience with other systems is probably not as extensive as other staff. And because I've been at LAC for 14 years now,
okay.
And we had the old system Amicus up until 2018.
Okay.
So my only experience with other systems was prior to 2006 when I was a student worker in libraries. And you only see a small portion, like as a student worker, you don't get exposed to that many different tasks. As a integrated library management software, World Share Management Services is still pretty young compared to some of the other software that's out there. But overall, it works well. It met all of the requirements that we had when we selected a software, and they are continually improving the software, and they have a structured process where libraries that are using the software can make suggestions and other libraries can comment on the suggestions.
Okay.
So like there's online chat for discussion boards basically, where libraries can post their ideas and you can add extra examples or talk about why or why not you wouldn't use that particular suggestion or ways to tweak the suggestion. And they take those and feed them into their development process, which has been really interesting because our old system, Amicus,
Mm-hmm.
while we controlled it internally, it also was totally static for a number of years. Like there were no more updates after a certain amount of time.
Okay.
So it's been really nice for us to see a system that evolves, although that is a bit of a learning curve for all of us. Just because we got used to, like now we're having to get used to something changing every few months.
Okay.
But yeah, no, overall, things are working pretty well.
Okay. Okay. Who can be a library user at LAC?
So anyone can search the catalog.
Okay.
And anyone can get help from the reference staff without having to register in any way.
Okay.
If you need to consult physical items in the collection, you have to come visit us in Ottawa, and then you have to register and get what's called a user card. And in order to get a user card, you need a fixed address and a piece of photo ID.
Okay.
But otherwise, if you have those two things, anyone can get a user card. You don't have to live in Canada. You don't have to get a letter of introduction from anybody. You just have to meet the basic requirements for a user card.
Okay. What kind of user information is maintained in the automated circulation computer system?
Okay, I'm going to try and keep this brief because
Okay.
it's a bit because for us it's complicated because we have the archival side of the institution as well, which is not managed out of WorldShare. It's managed in a totally different system.
Okay.
So we have an internal to LAC, an internal application where we enter and manage our user profiles.
Okay.
And that keeps your name, contact information, like phone, address, telephone, email. You get a barcode, like a user barcode when you register for a user card, and there are expiry dates associated with those barcodes. So it's the end of your privileges, basically, like there's a set period and you can renew it. So that's what's kept in the internal application, and that feeds both the archival system and WorldShare for the library side.
Okay.
There's minimal, we keep the bare minimum in WorldShare, and it's basically your barcode, your name, one piece of contact information, the expiry date for your barcode, and we assign everybody the same patron type or the same user category that contributes to circulation, but that's it. That is, and so that's about you as a person. We also track your history of borrowing in the system.
And that's internal?
We do that. That's internal. The client doesn't see the history.
Okay.
That's internal. And we do that for a set number of years in case of loss or damage to the materials.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any like user alerts, blocks, any sort of patron messages that might come up in, because you have such a limited amount that's there? Will it come up in the WorldShare system if they have a block against them?
Yeah. So there is a way of blocking the patron. There's a specific function in the system for blocking. We tend not to use it. What the staff workflow is they'll mark the card as the barcode is expired. They'll manually change the date.
Okay.
And they do the same thing in the internal system. And that's the reason why they mark the barcode as expired is that's the only way they can do it in the internal system to block somebody. So
Okay.
they change the date, stick a note in the internal system that they've been suspended or whatever. And it's for consistency's sake, it's easier if they do the same thing on the public over the published side.
Right. Okay. Okay. How do you find that user privacy has affected circulation? Oh, sorry. I couldn't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh, I've lost audio.
Yeah, you cut out a bit after the word effect.
Pardon?
Oh,
Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, I cut out after the word effect. Okay. How does
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, okay. How does user privacy affect circulation work at LAC?
Oh, how much time do you have? Okay. So privacy was the main reason why we only entered the bare minimum in WorldShare.
Okay.
So that's the first thing.
Okay.
The staff, the way circulation works is there's very little material self-serve. Clients have to use the catalog to request that material be brought out of storage for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we make sure that only the bare minimum of client information appears on those slips. Okay. So it's your name and your barcode that's on the slips, okay, plus the information about the publication that you're requesting.
Okay.
Yeah, and otherwise we pay attention in the rooms and in the systems so that we're not leaving information about clients lying around, and we're not enabling or allowing people that don't need access to client information. We're not allowing them to have access to it. Like the catalogers don't have access to the circulation module in the system because that would give them access to client data and they don't need it for their work.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned self-service. What self-service options do you have? You said you do very little, but you do some. What is the self-service options you have?
Yeah. So there's 3 main kind of small little collections that are self-service.
Okay.
There's the reference collection. So that covers a wide variety of topics, but it's meant for reference purposes. There is a microform collection that's available. So that's microfiche and microfilms. Okay. And they're usually things like the newspapers, magazines, and some indexes that are most frequently requested. So those are on self-serve to make it easier for everybody. And then the third is the genealogy and family history collection. And that's not everything related to genealogy and family history in our collection. There's not enough space for it, but it's the items that have been identified as most likely to be needed on a regular basis.
Okay. What are
Go
ahead.
I just want to add the self-serve might change when we reopen to the public because of COVID. Okay. But in the before times, those were self-service.
Okay. For the check-in and check-out procedures, excluding COVID, obviously, because that's extenuating circumstances, but under normal routine, how did you handle check-in and check-out using the system?
Okay. So clients have to request everything out of the stacks.
Okay.
So there's no situation where a client walks up to a staff person with a book that has not been checked out and asks for checkout. Checkout happens before the client ever touches the book.
Okay.
So what happens is the client uses the catalog to request an item.
Mm-hmm.
A slip prints out. A staff member goes and finds it.
Okay.
A staff member brings it to a computer terminal in a staff area. They pull up the client profile. They check out the material. And then they send it to what's called a consultation room. And it gets put on pickup shelves with the retrieval slip tucked in it, so that clients can identify what's got their name on it. And it sits in the consultation room for the client to come get it. So it's checked out before the client ever sees it, which is weird. That's not how it typically happens for libraries.
Mm-hmm.
For check-in, so the client comes, they consult it in the room. They're not allowed to leave the room with it. They consult it. When they're done with it, they either leave it on the table or they put it on shelves that are marked as return shelves.
Okay.
Staff gather it out of the room. It goes back down to a central location where circulation staff are, and then circulation staff check in everything in that pile. And then those get sorted and they'll get taken down for reshelving.
Okay. Okay. And how do you handle, do you have renewals and that kind of thing? Like if somebody says they're going to need it again, do they just have to go through the entire process again? Or is there a way to request that?
They can talk to a staff member. They don't have to return it. And in fact, we don't want them to return it because some materials are kept in a different building and it would take like a full week because the item would go back and then they'd request it and it would take a couple of days to come again.
Okay.
So what they do is they talk to a staff member and the staff member can do a renewal in the system.
Okay.
The clients can also, if they're savvy and comfortable with computers, they can go into the catalog, into their profile, and there is a button for renew, as long as they haven't already renewed the material. Okay. So they get one renewal they can do themselves, and after that, they have to talk to a staff member.
Okay. Okay, and just so I have this right, so they have the consultation room. They are not to remove any items from the consultation room. They cannot take anything home with them. It all has to remain in that room. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so how do you handle then? You were mentioning about loss or not loss, but damaged items and that kind of thing. How do you handle damaged items?
That's a good question. It's rare. Well, okay. Occasionally the staff will notice damaged items when they're being returned or when they're checking them in.
Okay.
And we have staff in another team that can do repairs. So they will normally just put the item aside and send it to the team for repairs. We operate on good faith. Basically, we're assuming that no one is purposefully trying to damage the material. Some of our material is old or it's just delicate and fragile and things will start to fall apart even if you're being careful with them. So it's rare that we will pursue follow up with a client because usually the assumption is it's just because of the age or the fragility of the material.
Okay. Do you have an actual policy in place for that, like a written policy, or is it more on a case-by-case basis?
There is a user agreement that the user, and it's on the website.
Okay.
So if you go to our website and look for user card registration, it will talk about the user card agreement. And in there are requirements about being careful with the collection and not stealing from the collection. But as far as I know, in terms of follow-up with a client, it's on a case-by-case basis, and it tends to be rare.
Okay.
Like only in the case of valuable material, like valuable or rare material.
Okay. Okay. So based on this, you probably don't operate with the same sort of barcode system as you would with other items. Do you have like barcode devices? Do you have RFID? Are you able to put those because some of the materials are archived, or do you operate under a different sort of security system?
That's an excellent question. We do barcode material. If it's rare or fragile, we will usually we'll try and barcode the container in like a container instead. Like if it's in an envelope, we'll barcode the envelope, or we'll put it in a box and barcode the box. But we're trying to put a barcode on everything, but the collection is so big and the collection started so many years before barcoding became regular practice that maybe not even half the collection actually has a barcode on it.
Okay.
Which is very challenging when it comes to automating processes with a system, because the system is looking for barcode as the identifier for the item. But we do try and barcode, and we do use barcodes as much as possible. We don't have RFID, although it's something that we might look into for the joint building that we're working on with the Ottawa Public Library.
Okay.
But we don't have RFID in any of the buildings yet.
Okay.
We do have an internal physical location management system for some items that tracks location because staff are scanning it every time they move the item.
Okay.
But that's only for some items, and it's like for retrieval, it would be they would go and find the item, take it to a desk, and then they'd scan the item in the desk at that point, and now the item is recognized as being at that desk. If they put it in a bin for transport, they'd scan the bin and then scan the bin to a truck, and then we know that the bin's in a truck, and that's where the item is. But that's only for a portion of the collection. So we kind of have a range of scenarios. We have a ton of items that have no barcode. So all we have is a record in the catalog saying we hold it. That's it. There is no physical trace of the item. We have items that have barcodes, but that's it. There's no way of physically knowing where they are other than they have a call number and we can check the shelf for that call number. And then the third category is items that have a barcode and have been entered in the physical tracking system. And for those, if they've been scanned at every point along the way, we should know where that item physically is.
Okay.
But so we have items in all of those situations.
Yeah, that sounds like a handful.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I guess this is opinion based, but what would you consider the material that you are primarily known for? The type, not necessarily the subject matter, but the type of material.
My opinion is that the library side of Library and Archives Canada tends to get less attention from from people who are not necessarily in the library world. So the general public or people on the archival side tend to think of the archive side first.
Okay.
It's people who are already in the library world that think of the library side first. But generally speaking, I think the ones that kind of get mentioned the most often are government docs. And we have a big collection of that. The music collection used to be really well known. And then I think, this is a subject, but I have to say it. The genealogy collection, I think, gets a lot of attention, even though genealogy researchers are still only a small portion compared to the big picture. Mm-hmm. And genealogy researchers use a huge variety of materials. Yeah. Like, it's a misnomer to say that genealogy is a type of material, because there's a whole range of types of documents that people use for genealogy.
Yeah. Okay. Do you find that there are any particular difficulties that you have in processing materials? Like, for example, the music collection. Now, presumably that's going to include older, more fragile and rare recordings. Yeah. Do you find that there's a lot of processing difficulties? Or what do you find in terms of processing? Is there anything in particular that you find has come about that has made it difficult to keep things in the condition at which they are required?
So for the initial processing, I think the big challenge is simply quantity compared to the number of staff we have.
Okay.
Because we're required through legal deposit to acquire 1 to 2 copies of everything, and because there's so much stuff being put out, mm-hmm. there's a huge pile of material, and we have backlogs on both the physical side and on the digital side.
Okay.
Circulation, like in terms of actually giving clients access, or the physical side, I think there's 2 big challenges. One is the size of the collection. So like, we're constantly looking for space to try and put everything. Mm-hmm. And secondly is what I described earlier, where a portion of the collection is not barcoded at all. Some of it is barcoded but not physically tracked, and then some of it is barcoded and physically tracked.
Okay.
So trying to come up with processes that can cover all 3 with all the like exceptions and bizarre cases that we have all across the collection can be challenging.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That's kind of it. I didn't expect that. That's one of the surprises from today. Okay. Do you find that the automated system, going back to that, do you find that there is anything in WorldShare that helps to take inventory?
There are inventory functions in WorldShare. So okay. It's part of the check-in functionality. So instead of doing like a loan return check-in, there's an option to do inventory. So it doesn't count as like a typical user returned it check-in. It's an inventory check-in. It's like, it basically tells the system, I have seen this item.
Yeah.
The system also has functionality which we didn't used to have, where you can go to an item and see when it was last checked in, like basically when somebody last scanned it into the system.
Yeah.
They have a mobile app. So if we had Wi-Fi in all of our stacks, in all of our buildings, we could, or telephone data service in all of the buildings and all of the storage areas, we could send staff with phones or tablets to go and scan things on the shelves and do an inventory that way.
Okay.
But again, there are limits to that because not everything's barcoded.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm not sure how, typically libraries weed their collections. How does LAC process that? Because you do have to keep a certain number of copies. How do you weed your inventory? How does that work?
We have gone through, so we have very specific obligations for things that fall under legal deposit. So we have very specific obligations, you're right, so we can't weed those. But if, say, we purchased something for like the reference collection or a different collection that is not subject to legal deposit, we could weed it. Normally, weeding requires a high-level decision that we have to justify, and we have to have taken into account user needs and space requirements and where the material might go if we deselect it. We often try and identify another library or another institution that could take it. So we used to have 2 copies of provincial official publications.
Okay.
And we decided that we would keep 1 copy. And so there was the process that I just described as people analyzed it and looked at various factors, and then there was a high-level decision, and LAC worked with libraries across the country so that the copies that we weren't going to keep anymore could go to libraries to fill in gaps in their collections.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Out of curiosity, when those decisions are made for weeding the collection, do you use the automated system to try and help you with that, or is it purely a decision that you've made through seeing through some other means other than using the computer?
Well, we definitely well, first I should say we haven't done like really any weeding with the new system.
Okay.
But we definitely use the library system to help with weeding because that's where we get lists of what we hold, and it'll tell us how many copies of each of those things we have. We also have to update the catalog after like any weeding activity takes place, so we go back, like it's involved as part of the process. But no, it definitely, like the data from the catalog feeds into the conversation about what we hold and how many items and how many copies and those facts that are considered in the.
Okay. What does LAC do in the event of a power outage or a system goes down? How do you go about it?
That's because every now and then our entire network goes down. We have lost power. We've had a few different situations. There are manual workarounds using paper. So if, for circulation purposes, if we can stay open and users can stay in the building and keep consulting, there are often paper workarounds that we can do if we can get enough information about the item so that the retrieval staff could still go find the item.
Okay.
But if the network's down and none of us can access the catalog to find out what the call number is or where it's stored, then there's not much we can do. Okay. If it's a power outage or if it is another significant outage that affects health and safety, we're not actually allowed to stay in the building, and we certainly can't have members of the public in the building. So we have actually had to shut the building in the past that we run public services out of because we could not stay open.
Okay.
And provide service. So unfortunately, in those situations, it's just we suspend service entirely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. You said that WMS, or sorry, WorldShare, as you call it, generates statistical reports for you. What kind of statistical reports do you use it for?
So the circulation teams use it to keep track of how many requests they receive for each of the storage buildings, or requests for particular format types or against particular shelving locations. So they use it for that. The cataloging teams use reports to keep track of what's in their backlog location, like how many items are still waiting. The acquisitions teams use it to keep track of how, like, all the thousands of things they process. They have dozens of reports. They are like report maniacs. So they do a bunch of reports on all the various types of documents that they've acquired, how many ordered, received, against which publishers, what else? And then we in the systems team will do different types of reports to try and identify documents that fall into certain categories. So those aren't necessarily statistical reports, they're lists.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, an equally important reporting ability, is not just to be able to get numbers, but actually to be able to get lists of items that match certain criteria.
Okay. All right, that is everything. Is there anything else you wanted me to know related to the automated computer system? Anything that you find particularly interesting that you feel is worthy of note?
I started out in reference, and I really think that it's important that your automation start with what you're trying to accomplish for your users, as opposed to what your system can do. Like, every system is going to have things it can and can't do, but you should start with what you need it to do and what your users need it to do, and start from there, and then see how your system can support that, as opposed to starting it by looking at the system and like, what are the millions of ways we could, what are all the fancy processes we could do with this system, whether or not they're actually helpful. The second thing I'd like to say is that it's always a ripple effect. Even if you think it won't be, things that happen in acquisitions affect cataloging, things that happen in acquisitions affect public services. Circulation and public services are downstream of most functions, so they tend to feel a lot of ripple effects, but it's all interconnected. And so it's really important, and this is something like, and it's hard for everyone to wrap their brain around, because you're trying to get through